Within 3 weeks, I was dancing on top of the roof. Not only had I had the courage to leave, but the emotional want, and I was excited about breaking free. What was interesting in all of this was how he completely changed. I never told him I was seeing a hypnotherapist. He had no idea that I had contacted lawyers. He suddenly became the good husband, wanted to take me out for Valentine's Day. He wanted to talk about our issues and all the good stuff that you want in a husband. So, how come he changed when I was the one getting help to improve? Today, we're talking about how I was finally able to leave my husband for good with no longer growing weak at the knees and hopeful every time that he lulled me back in with his love bombing. This guy was abusive, but I was addicted to the relationship. He was finally somebody that I found who had other interests than me. I was attracted to the needy ones. The men in my life had all been extremely needy. And that was always why I walked away. I couldn't keep a relationship because they were way too dependent on me. They were constantly in my space. I could never have a moment to myself, and I am a loner. I could never talk to anyone without having these jealousy fits from them. And with him, I was allotted my alone time, all right. But the thing is that he left me completely alone. I was never included in anything. I need space, yes, in a relationship. And that was the big attraction. But I also need love. This guy would take 6-week vacations every single summer, and I wasn't informed to his whereabouts, leaving me alone to take care of the two children with one who was severely asthmatic. And to boot, at that time, we had one vehicle. So middle of the night asthma attacks and my infant son to emergency and back were extremely challenging. I mean, who are you going to call in the middle of 3 o'clock in the morning when the doctors release your son? You have to get back home. The ambulance is not going to take you back. He pulled some crazy things in those days, like have me play secretary while answering phones to his sidekick as they planned their dates right in front of me while I was pregnant with his child. Nice, huh? In all the years that we were together, he never once took me out, yet he didn't miss his parties. Matter of fact, when I was pregnant and had to stop working for a while, I spent all my days alone and all my nights alone at home, no vehicle. He would come home after work and he'd grab a shower and then he'd head back out. During that time, he had moved me to an area too far to walk to my mother's or my friends, so I was alone all week, day in and day out, nowhere to turn, no one to turn to. I didn't know the neighbors, and the weekends, they were no different. And one day, I couldn't take it anymore. I begged him to not leave. I was 7 months pregnant and I couldn't take this aloneness, not anymore. And in my desperation, I found myself grabbing his leg to stop him from leaving. I was that desperate. And what he did was he spit on my unborn child and then he punched me in the stomach. His child. And then he grabbed my arm, threw me in the van and drove to my mother's house 3 towns away where he swung open the door and pushed me out of the van. That night, I sat on the sidewalk just crying until my mother happened to look out the window and find me there. That night, I went into labor, and because I was only 7 months pregnant, they had to get me on IVs for a couple of days. I was weak, and they needed to get me strong again because they said that I wouldn't survive the C-sections if they didn't do that. He never came to the hospital, and I didn't go back. I stayed at my mother's until the baby was born, where he then pursued me at the hospital. First time I'd seen him in all that time, with wonderful apologies and I'll never do that again and I'm doing AA meetings now. I still didn't go back right away and he kept showing himself to be stable and committed. And like you all know how that goes, right? The love bombing. The moment I came back, he started all his crap over again. I was young and I was traumatized and I'm not going to talk about all the crazy stuff he continued doing because I'd be writing a book. But over time, there were breakups and reconnecting. And I was terrified of leaving for 2 reasons. A, I loved him. And B, all I kept thinking was that I would end up being with these needy men again who make you responsible for their happiness, who stalk you all the time, who get upset with you if you're 5 minutes late or you talk to some guy. That was so exhausting for me. But this guy, he did everything covertly. Anyone around him always saw him as the chill, funny guy who would always be there to lend a helping hand to others. People loved him. The mask. He had a really good one. No one knew how he beat me up during my last pregnancy and forced me to get an abortion. No one knew how I paid for everything, even though at the beginning he made more money than I did. And when I decided that I seriously had to do something was when the children were getting to an age where they were old enough to start seeing things. So I visited lawyers with questions, but still hadn't filed for divorce as of yet. I wanted to find a way to leave him for good where I would not only no longer want the experience, but no longer want him, period, for good. No more taking him back, no more love bombing. And a friend of mine one day was telling me that her husband was seeing a hypnotherapist to help him quit drinking, and it was working. So sign me up. So I walked into the office, and Bob, the hypnotherapist, bless his soul, he's passed now, says that he looks at me, he says, well, what can I do for you? And I just looked at him and I said, well, I want you to help me hate my husband. And he cracked a smile and said, sit down. But what Bob did for me was not hate me, help my husband, but love myself, believe in myself, in one aspect of myself. That was only part of the healing. I'll get into that in a bit. He had me repeat in my mind's eye affirmations about confidence and power and strength. He was building me back up. And he told me not to force anything. And as long as I did the self-hypnosis twice daily, as I saw him once weekly, that I would be surprised by my own shifts. They would just come naturally. Within 3 weeks, I was dancing on top of the roof. Not only had I had the courage to leave, but the emotional want, and I was excited about breaking free. What was interesting in all of this was how he completely changed. I never told him I was seeing a hypnotherapist. He had no idea that I had contacted lawyers. He suddenly became the good husband, wanted to take me out for Valentine's Day. He wanted to talk about our issues and all the good stuff that you want in a husband. So how come he changed when I was the one getting help to improve? It's quantum. When we change it from inside, our external also changes. We are all readers of energy, whether we're aware of it or not. And so he could read in my energy field that this time I wasn't walking away out of sadness and desperation. I wasn't getting ready to do that. He could feel I was getting ready to leave. I was walking away as a firm decision that he knew that this time there was no turning back. He was reading in my energy field, and I was no longer the victim. He was reading in my energy, strength, and confidence, and that he could no longer control me. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Now, was he in temporary change that would have reverted back again because he was love bombing, or was it real? I didn't know, and I wasn't sticking around to find out. Although it was confirmed to me by his actions after I left that this was not a good person. What happened is that all the things that he did for revenge once I left, and I won't mention it here, I already talk about that in one of my videos, but the vengeance was so hardcore that I stopped doing my own self-hypnosis from time to time, like Bob had recommended, because he wanted me to do it for about 2-3 weeks every day, a couple times a day, and then slow it down to maybe once a month, right? So, but I was in survival mode and just so busy picking up the messes that he kept creating. Over time, a long time actually, things settled somewhat, and I was able to refocus back on my life. But just as I find myself back on track in life, another abuser shows up, and round we go. Now, this one I left a lot sooner, but it got pretty heavy and dangerous fast. I was really blessed to get away from that. So I then spent the following years living as a single, independent woman, and I was happy. The men that I dated were not abusive, and life was good. Until years and years and years later, where lo and behold, the final narcissist that took it all home from me shows up in my life. So what had been missing with this hypnosis idea was that I still needed to dig deep and pull out all the traumas that were still inside of me. Confident, sure, but the blocks that had been there since childhood, the pain, the memories, the triggers that continued to rear its ugly head, those needed to be dealt with, and I had never dealt with them until I started studying up on narcissism. Hypnosis is the perfect tool to rebuild after we're completely drained, and yes, it'll help you vibe higher and it'll make you way less concerned with the narcissist's games. And yes, the external will change, whether it's real or not, or fake, a mask, right? But sooner or later, be it 6 months or 6 years, someone will come along again because you're still attracting them, and they'll interrupt your life to a whole new level. The more we don't learn the lessons, the harder the experiences become as life progresses. We have to clean up our energetic fields. Remember, we're readers of energy. A lot of us have learned to be codependent as a survival mechanism. We need to be needed. We need to be acknowledged. That's normal. But with us, we lacked it growing up. And so in order to survive, we have to chase it. We need to keep eating to survive. And we need to be acknowledged also to survive. We need a tribe. And in this quest for survival, we're constantly there for people who are not there for us. And that's because we don't know our own worth. And we don't know our own worth because we don't know our own values. We don't know our own values because we've never really stopped to understand the depth of what that means. The word value to us is just a word. It has no meaning. We've never taken the time for us because we've been too busy looking to be there for others. Again, survival mode. So we haven't identified exactly what we want in life and how we want it. Because determining what we want moves us forward. Getting clear on what we want, it brings us forward. It's part of your value system. To have a value means that certain things are needed in order for each individual to be fulfilled, to be able to live a day that you're living out your purpose. I mean, what if your purpose, as an example here, what if your purpose is to help people somehow? What if that's what makes you happy? It's what makes you feel joy, makes you feel peace and an excitement to wake up every morning looking forward to a new day. Imagine that. You know how I spend my days? I'm not saying I always have good days here, believe me. I blast YouTube meditative music on my TV as I go about my day. I work from home. And I do that because one of my core values is beauty. I need to bathe in beautiful music that brings me back to self, to the moment. And then I need to create my space in the same manner. And that way, every room I walk in, I can see beauty. And that puts me into an appreciative state, which is gratitude, actually. And then I burn incense, lots and lots of incense. And that gratitude, in turn, it connects me to the divine, where I'm not walking alone on this journey called life. And that brings me peace. And then I can focus. I'm returned to the moment and everything in front of me becomes purposeful. And I'm able to move forward. Like I said, not on all days. Sometimes I have to put some extra music. But for me, I need that in order to function in the world. I wouldn't be capable of a relationship in my life living with someone who makes that impossible to happen. Yet I did that. I wasn't respecting my values. Hell, I didn't know my values, but I knew I was living in hell. Because even though I knew some values, like I need space, that I knew, right? I made sure that he had his own living room. I like to hang out, but as much as I do, I also need a lot of space because I'm a thinker and I study. But since I ignored my other values, like cleanliness, order, life became a nightmare. He lived like a slob. I clean the kitchen 5-6 times a day. And you know, narcissists, you can't address those issues because if you do, more peace will be taken away. So my home no longer smelled pretty and meditation music no longer played in my house. It had been replaced by screaming and messes to clean. So values are everything. A value can be honesty, can be integrity, respect, compassion, courage, generosity, responsibility, empathy, adaptability, authenticity, optimism, curiosity. It just goes on and on and on and on. Accountability, commitment. It can be forgiveness. It can be commitment. And the list goes on. I think I just said commitment. There are hundreds out there. But the bottom line is that it's what you can handle in a relationship. What it is that you can and what it is that you cannot that makes you miserable. And I'm not saying putting up with here. Tolerating in order to find peace is not respecting a value. And that's what you're doing already, which means you aren't happy and you are not living your purpose. I'm not trying to scold you here. I sometimes get a little intense. But when you've been through narcissistic abuse, especially in childhood or long-term relationships, not honoring your own core values often becomes a survival strategy. Over time, it can feel like the only way to stay safe, loved, or not abandoned is to shut up and forget about your needs. But once you start to heal, you just don't feel a need for those narcissists to be in your life. It was conditioning. You were conditioned to abandon yourself. In narcissist dynamics, especially with a partner or a parent, you often learn that your needs, your emotions, and your values don't matter unless they serve the narcissist. So everybody's always more important than you. So what happens is that you start disconnecting from your own truth. You make yourself smaller. You mold your personality to fit what they want, just to avoid conflict, shame, or punishment. And over time, you internalize the belief, if I honor my truth, I'll lose love, safety, or connection. Core values get replaced with survival patterns. Instead of living by values like authenticity, peace, or freedom, you start living by survival. Don't speak up. Keep the peace. Don't make them mad. Stay useful. Always be agreeable. Those aren't values. They're trauma adaptations. You're surviving, not living. And chronic self-betrayal, it feels normal if you've been gaslit or invalidated enough. You start mistrusting your own feelings and perceptions. So even if you value things like honesty, respect, or emotional depth, you second guess your reactions. You tolerate disrespect or manipulation because you've been trained to doubt your own inner voice. My God, you matter. That's why reclaiming your core values is a form of reparenting yourself. It's choosing moment by moment to stop the cycle of self-abandonment. Narcissists often punish you for having values because that goes with boundaries, right? They don't like those boundaries. You value truth, you're called too sensitive or dramatic. You value boundaries, you're selfish. You value respect, you're difficult or ungrateful. So what do? You compromise your truth to avoid the emotional attack. Because you have to. But that betrayal, it sits heavy in the body. And it shows up later as anxiety, depression, or deep dissatisfaction with life. Healing means reclaiming your values as sacred. It means noticing the moment that you go to self-abandonment and gently choosing yourself instead, even if it's awkward, even if your nervous system screams danger. If you want to start on your healing journey, my advice is to go Google and find the one that has the most values in the list and go through them and write down which ones ring true. Now, of course, you're going to find some values like you value things like good food, but there are others that hold such an importance for you that you can't live without. For example, fidelity. Now, those are your core values. So those are the ones that I want you to write down, the ones that you could not be happy without. And from there, use your intuition. Ask yourself questions like, what's getting in the way of living these values now? And this helps identify internal blocks or lingering trauma patterns. What fears, beliefs, or people make it difficult for you to live by your values? And that's where hypnosis can really help. Are there situations where you shrink yourself to avoid conflict or rejection? What were you taught to value? When we ask questions, we start to move forward because answers will lead to other questions like, how do I change that now that I know this? Or how do I heal this part of me? Take your time, be gentle with yourself. This isn't about perfect answers. It's about honesty. Socrates said, know thyself, because it has big value. One question, I'm not sure if I mentioned it or not, but I'll mention it anyway. You want to look at what's getting in the way of living these values. Now, this one's very important, and this helps identify internal blocks or lingering trauma patterns. What fears, beliefs, or people make it difficult for you to live by your values? Are there situations where you shrink yourself to avoid conflict or rejection? What were you taught to value? And these often come from family, school, or culture, not necessarily from your soul. What did you learn was good or worthy or acceptable growing up? Were you expected to value obedience, perfection, control, or performance? And then reflect. Do these things still feel aligned with who I truly am? Or do they still feel heavy, forced, or draining? And then ask yourself, when did I betray my own values in order to keep the peace? Was it just with this last partner, or was it in childhood? This question, it helps uncover survival patterns and self-abandonment behavior. Describe a time when you knew something didn't feel right, but you stayed silent or went along with it anyway. What were you afraid would happen if you honored your truth? Get to know yourself. Give yourself that attention, that space. That in itself is a value. Anyway, I'm not here to do a whole course, but I want you to get the gist, to explore your within. Because when we start doing the work, the next steps usually introduce themselves to us. That is all for today. And in the meantime, I will leave a hypnosis link down below should anyone want to start with the healing. So on that note, take care, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.